He left home that afternoon with nothing but a phone, earbuds, and a smile his mother still remembers. He didn't come back. 34 minutes later, 2 shots echoed down a quiet suburban street, and a teenager was left lifeless on the pavement, his body sprawled beside a half-open bag of Skittles. No weapon. No warning. Just bullets. The officers said he matched a description. The family said he was murdered. The city lit up with protest signs and police tape, accusations and official silence. But that's not where this story ends. What began as a case of alleged police misconduct didn't fade away like so many others. This time, a grieving father didn't just seek answers. He pursued justice on his own terms, and what followed would leave one officer dead, another wounded, and a city asking how grief could lead to such destruction. This isn't just about a shooting. It's about what people do when the system stops listening. The official statement was short. An officer-involved shooting occurred at approximately 4:32 p.m. The suspect was believed to be armed. The situation is under investigation. That was it. No name. No age. No explanation. Just another entry in the endless log of police dispatch summaries. But in a small community in Northern California, that vague paragraph described the final moments of a 17-year-old boy named Malik Thompson. A student athlete, an older brother, a son who never made it home. Within hours, the story took hold on social media. Some said Malik had been running from the police. Others claimed he had turned to face them. Most agreed on one thing: he wasn't carrying a weapon. What began as a routine patrol stop exploded into national outrage. But while the headlines focused on the shooting, what unfolded in the days and weeks that followed went largely unnoticed by the public until it was too late. As crowds gathered outside the county courthouse, one man stood silently near the back. His name was Anthony Thompson, Malik's father. A quiet man by nature. A factory foreman with no history of violence. To those who knew him, Anthony was thoughtful, restrained, and deeply protective of his children. But something inside him shifted after that day. He didn't hold press conferences. He didn't lead rallies. He didn't call for vengeance. At least not out loud. Instead, he began collecting documents. Body cam timestamps. Radio chatter. Dispatch logs. He requested autopsy records and tracked down civilian footage frame by frame. Anthony wasn't interested in trending hashtags. He wanted the truth. But over time, the lines between truth and justice began to blur. By the time the public heard his name again, 2 people were dead, 1 officer was in critical condition, and the same police department that once dismissed Malik as a suspect was now calling his father a threat to public safety. Tonight, we retrace the chain of events that turned a grieving parent into the most wanted man in the county. Malik Thompson was born on April 6, 2006, in Stockton, California, a middle-sized city with all the trappings of American suburbia, plus its fair share of complicated policing history. By 17 he was already a local name, not because of any run-ins with the law, but because of what he did on the football field. Coaches praised his footwork, teachers called him respectful, and classmates said he was the kind of person who could cross social circles without tension. On campus, he was known for his loyalty, quiet but dependable, a good listener, never the loudest voice but always present when it counted. His younger sister Ava once described him in a class essay as, "the reason I'm not scared to walk home from school." Malik's mother, Denise, worked night shifts at a local urgent care clinic. His father, Anthony, worked at a metal fabrication plant and coached youth basketball on weekends. The Thompsons weren't wealthy, but they were steady, structured, united. On March 18, 2024, Malik left the house in a hoodie, jeans, and worn-out Nikes. His backpack hung loose on one shoulder. He texted his mother to say he'd be home by 6:30. He never made it back. That Monday had been unusually warm for early spring. School had let out around 3:15 p.m., and by 4 o'clock, Malik was walking home along a stretch of road between Pacific Avenue and El Dorado Street, a commercial zone with strip malls, small businesses, and fast food spots. Security footage later confirmed he stopped at a gas station convenience store at 4:07 p.m. He bought a sports drink and a small pack of candy. The footage showed him placing his receipt in his pocket and exiting the store calmly, not in a hurry. At 4:12 p.m., a 911 call came in reporting a male matching the description of a recent burglary suspect, seen walking near the West Park Plaza area. The caller did not identify a weapon, nor did they confirm the individual had committed a crime. Dispatch recorded the message and routed it to 2 patrol officers already canvassing the neighborhood for unrelated calls. 4 minutes later, officers Landon Bryce and Jacob Neri spotted Malik walking near a fenced utility building. They turned on their emergency lights and approached. What happened next was recorded on one of the officers' body-worn cameras. According to official audio, Officer Bryce instructed Malik to stop. Malik can be heard asking, "Why? What did I do?" The officers did not immediately respond with a reason. Instead, commands escalated quickly. In the footage, Malik takes 2 steps backward and appears to glance over his shoulder, toward the road. His left hand is raised slightly. He's holding his phone. The officers claim he reached toward his waistband, though the video shows no weapon. At 4:17 p.m., 2 shots were fired. Malik collapsed onto the sidewalk, face down. He was pronounced dead at the scene by paramedics 6 minutes later. He was 17 years old. Within an hour, police had blocked off the area with yellow tape. Local residents gathered at the edge of the scene, some recording, others in disbelief. Word spread fast. A teenager was dead and witnesses were already questioning the officer's actions. A woman who lived in an apartment across the street later told reporters, "He was just standing there. I didn't see a weapon. He didn't run. They told him to stop and before he could say anything else they shot him." The police department released a brief public notice stating that a suspect was shot during a field interaction with law enforcement. No weapon was recovered at the scene. That detail was quietly confirmed in a press conference 36 hours later. According to the statement issued by Stockton PD, officers Bryce and Neri responded to a suspicious person report in the area of West Park Plaza. The subject, later identified as Malik Thompson, allegedly failed to comply with verbal commands and made what officers described as a rapid movement toward his waistband, prompting them to open fire. Both officers claimed they feared for their lives. Neither had been injured. A thorough search of Malik's body and belongings produced no weapon, only a cell phone, earbuds, a receipt from the gas station, and a pocket knife with a closed blade, untouched in his backpack. Dashcam footage and nearby surveillance captured only partial views of the incident. One civilian recording surfaced online, but it began after the shots were fired, showing only the aftermath: Malik on the ground, officers calling for backup. The police union released a statement defending the officers' decision, citing heightened tensions and rising crime in the neighborhood. Internal Affairs opened an investigation, and both officers were placed on administrative leave pending review, standard procedure. By March 19, protesters gathered outside City Hall holding signs with Malik's photo and slogans demanding justice. His high school held a vigil on the football field. Teachers wept. Students posted tributes on TikTok and Instagram. Hashtags flooded timelines. News trucks lined the street outside the Thompson home. But Anthony Thompson didn't speak. He didn't appear on camera. He didn't stand with protesters. He stayed inside watching news coverage, playing the bodycam footage over and over in a loop, trying to make sense of what went wrong. Denise Thompson, Malik's mother, gave a statement to the press on day 3. "He was a child. He wasn't armed. He wasn't running. He wasn't a threat. He had dreams. He had friends. He had a future. And now I have a funeral to plan." Community leaders demanded the release of all video evidence. They questioned the officers' quick escalation and lack of de-escalation tactics. The local NAACP chapter held a meeting with city officials. Legal representatives for the Thompson family began the early stages of a wrongful death lawsuit. But the question lingered: why was Malik stopped in the first place? What description was he allegedly matching? No burglary had been reported in the area within the past 48 hours. The police refused to release the identity of the 911 caller. By week 2, media attention had begun to fade. Another case had taken over the headlines in a neighboring state. The officers remained on paid leave. The investigation was ongoing with no timeline for its conclusion. Malik's funeral was held privately. Closed casket. Limited guests. Anthony sat in the front row, expression blank, hands clenched around a folded program bearing his son's face. He left immediately after the service and declined all interview requests. But privately he was already gathering everything he could. Phone records, dispatch logs, maps, eyewitness accounts. Something wasn't sitting right. And he wasn't willing to wait quietly for an answer that might never come. Anthony Thompson didn't yell. He didn't go live on social media. He didn't knock on the doors of City Hall with a crowd behind him. He printed out the police statement. He wrote down every name mentioned in the brief press conference. He downloaded a copy of the body cam footage. And he watched it, again and again. He watched the moment his son raised his hands. He watched the part where Malik tried to speak, but the command to stop came first. He memorized the timestamp where the second shot fired. He paused the screen where the officer stepped over Malik's body, not to check for a weapon but to call dispatch. His grief wasn't loud. It was methodical, intentional. He asked questions but not on television. He filed public record requests. He spoke with a family attorney. He knocked on the door of a store owner whose security camera faced the corner where Malik was shot. The footage didn't show the full event, but it captured something crucial. Malik standing still. His hands empty. It took 12 days for the family to receive the official autopsy. A week longer than expected. The cause of death was listed as multiple gunshot wounds to the thorax. The report stated both bullets entered the front of Malik's body. Neither shot was from behind. Both struck vital organs. The second round pierced his left lung. He likely died before paramedics arrived. But there was a line in the report that stopped Anthony cold. No stippling or close-range gunpowder residue identified. This detail raised a red flag. It meant that the shots were likely fired from a greater distance, not during a physical struggle and not in the middle of an attack. Denise, Malik's mother, said nothing for nearly a minute after reading the report. Then she pushed the papers away and walked out of the room. Later that evening she gave one more comment to the press. They didn't see our son. They saw a threat. A threat who didn't exist. Anthony submitted multiple requests to the city for full access to the 911 call that led officers to Malik. He wanted the audio. He wanted to know what was said. What description was given. He wanted the timestamps. The city responded with a partial transcript, citing ongoing review. The transcript contained one line. Black male mid to late teens, gray hoodie, walking toward the plaza. That matched half the high school student body. There was no mention of weapons. No mention of threatening behavior. No mention of criminal activity. The city also declined to release the full dispatch log. Portions were redacted. Even Malik's exact time of death was omitted from the version sent to the family's attorney. On March 27, 9 days after the shooting, the police department released a 2-minute edit of the body cam footage from Officer Bryce. The footage blurred Malik's face and muted parts of the audio. In the video, Malik appears confused, his hands at chest level. He asks a question but the audio skips. The next moment shows officers shouting. One moves into frame and the footage jerks violently before cutting to the sound of 2 gunshots. The edit ends with officers calling for backup. Community members criticized the release for its lack of transparency. Activists called it a carefully controlled narrative. Attorneys called it incomplete. Anthony called it deliberately edited. Despite mounting pressure, the department refused to release the full unedited video. Internal Affairs cited ongoing review. That phrase would be repeated more than a dozen times in the coming weeks. By early April, Stockton saw its largest protest in over a decade. Over 1,000 residents filled the Civic Center Plaza. Local clergy spoke about restraint and accountability. High school students marched with signs reading, "Hands up for Malik." Small business owners placed candles in their windows. A mural was painted on a nearby wall, showing Malik's face above the words, "He was unarmed." But not all voices were peaceful. Some called for Officer Bryce's resignation. Others demanded arrest. The mood shifted from mourning to outrage. Still, Anthony didn't speak. His silence confused the media. They wanted interviews. They wanted quotes. Instead, Anthony kept collecting. He compiled timelines. He printed out text message logs from Malik's phone provider. He measured the walking distance between the gas station and the site of the shooting. He bought a second-hand laptop. He uploaded video clips. He created folders labeled Dispatch Audio, Witness 2, and Timeline Revision 3. This was no longer just mourning. It was a man building a case. On April 8th, Anthony received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a USB stick. No note. No fingerprint. Just the drive. He opened the file cautiously, sitting alone in the living room. The screen flickered before revealing video footage that hadn't been released publicly. It appeared to be from a traffic cam mounted near the intersection where Malik had been stopped. The footage was grainy, but it showed the exact moment the patrol car pulled in front of Malik. What it also showed was telling. Malik's hands were visible, held outward, and his body language suggested confusion, not aggression. The video appeared to contradict portions of the police report, specifically the claim that Malik had made a rapid movement toward his waist. The footage also revealed something else. A second patrol car arrived only 30 seconds after the shots were fired. That car's presence had never been mentioned by the department. Anthony showed the footage to his attorney. They sent it to a civil rights investigator in Sacramento. A request was submitted to the city for an explanation. The request was denied. No record of a second patrol car was ever acknowledged in official statements. Inside the Thompson home, grief had created different responses. Denise withdrew. Ava, Malik's younger sister, stopped going to school. She didn't speak for nearly 4 days after watching the body cam footage. Her teacher described her as silent, disconnected. Anthony became harder to reach. He began missing work. Co-workers described him as focused but different. His boss asked if he needed time off. Anthony declined. Late at night, he would sit in the garage listening to police scanner audio, reading policy handbooks, printing out records from FOIA databases. He bought a whiteboard and mapped out the timeline. At the center, he wrote in red marker, Malik was unarmed. He began calling former officers. He asked them questions about use of force protocol, about trigger response, about radio codes. One officer, who agreed to speak off the record, told him that internal affairs investigations often rely heavily on an officer's own testimony. If they say they felt threatened, it's hard to challenge. The system's set up to protect their perception. That statement stuck with Anthony. On April 19, the Stockton Police Department held a press briefing. It lasted less than 10 minutes. After thorough internal review, we have determined that the officers involved acted within the scope of department policy. No charges will be filed. The case is now closed. No charges. No apology. No review of the 911 call source. The officers were cleared to return to duty. The Thompson family attorney called the ruling an insult. Activists called it a betrayal. Anthony said nothing to reporters. But those close to him noticed something different that week. He emptied his garage. He stopped returning calls from family members. He began driving long distances without explanation. He stopped sleeping in the house and started sleeping in his car. He requested a meeting with a retired homicide detective who once testified in a use-of-force case. He didn't tell his wife where he was going. He started visiting the same intersection where Malik was shot, every night. He stayed for hours just sitting there, sometimes jotting down notes, sometimes just staring. He watched the officers return to patrol the area. One evening, he followed them from a distance. Anthony had crossed an invisible line. Not publicly. Not yet. But mentally he had made a decision. The investigation was over. But his search for justice wasn't. On April 22, just over a month after Malik's death, Anthony left a voicemail for his brother. The message was short. The tone was calm. They think it's over. But they haven't heard from me yet. Tell Mom I love her. That was the last time anyone in the family heard from Anthony for 5 days. What came next would shock the entire county. On April 23, Anthony Thompson packed a duffel bag with a change of clothes, an external hard drive, a burner phone, and a leather-bound notebook. He left his ID on the kitchen table. He left his wedding ring in a drawer. He left no note. His truck was later picked up on traffic cameras heading southbound on Interstate 5, but for nearly 3 full days his location remained unknown. At first, his family thought he was grieving in solitude, escaping the noise, maybe checking into a motel. But when Denise called his cell, it rang twice and cut off. When she called again, it was disconnected. What no one knew at the time was that Anthony wasn't running from something. He was moving toward it. Anthony's first stop was in Merced, California, a 2-hour drive from Stockton. There, he visited the county courthouse to pull records from a past internal complaint filed against Officer Jacob Neri, one of the men present during Malik's shooting. The complaint dated back 5 years, filed by the family of a 22-year-old man who suffered a fractured jaw after being detained during a traffic stop. The case was dismissed due to lack of evidence. The body cam footage was reportedly lost during a department system upgrade. Anthony scanned every page and added it to a folder labeled Neri Incidents. Over the next several days he visited other counties, requesting access to use-of-force cases tied to the same names. He took notes on badge numbers, street assignments, supervisor reports, union statements, and suspension records. Anything he couldn't get through legal means, he tried to gather through old news archives and neighborhood connections. Anthony wasn't acting blindly. He was studying. Anthony returned to Stockton on April 26 under the cover of night. He didn't go home. He didn't call his wife. He rented a room under an alias at a budget motel off March Lane. Paid in cash. He bought a set of gloves, a prepaid GPS tracker, and a dashcam. In a separate transaction, he purchased a second-hand revolver from a man whose name was later redacted in court records. The serial number was missing. At night, Anthony would sit in his truck across from the precinct where the officers worked. He would wait, engine off, lights dimmed. Some nights he followed patrol units at a distance. Other nights he reviewed notes on his laptop. He wasn't interested in chaos. He wanted something specific. He wanted to face the men who, in his eyes, had ended his son's life without consequence. This wasn't about drawing attention. It was about forcing acknowledgement. By May 1st, Anthony had stopped responding to texts. His wife filed a missing persons report. Flyers went up. Police made no public comment about his absence. But internally, officials had already flagged his name after a tipster from the motel recognized him and reported suspicious behavior. Denise was asked if Anthony had access to firearms. She said no. The police didn't push further. Privately, she began to suspect what no parent wants to believe, that grief had pulled Anthony past the point of no return. That same week, Anthony wrote in his notebook, "They think silence is the end of a story. They think memory fades when no one is charged. They think fathers forget." It was a Friday. At 8:17 a.m., Officer Bryce exited the precinct on his way to his unmarked patrol vehicle. He had been reinstated to full duty 3 days earlier. He was scheduled to begin a neighborhood patrol shift near East Harding Way. As he opened his driver's side door, a man approached him from behind. The man spoke clearly. "You remember Malik?" Bryce turned, recognized the face, reached for his sidearm. A single shot rang out. The bullet struck Bryce in the upper chest. He collapsed to the pavement. Anthony stepped back, eyes locked on him, and then calmly turned and walked toward a second vehicle parked across the street. Within seconds, officers inside the building rushed out, weapons drawn. Anthony raised both hands. He said nothing. He did not resist. He was arrested without incident. Officer Bryce was rushed to San Joaquin General Hospital. He died later that evening from internal bleeding. News spread within hours. Local headlines read, "Malik Thompson's father kills officer in targeted attack." Stockton PD mourns fallen officer as community remains divided. The same community that marched for Malik found itself split. Some said Anthony had crossed a line. Others said he had been pushed into a corner by silence. Denise Thompson released a public statement through her attorney. "I don't condone what Anthony did, but I understand why he broke. My son was taken. My husband was ignored. Now I've lost both." At Anthony's arraignment, the judge denied bail. In court, he said only one sentence before being removed. He was unarmed. And no one paid for it. 3 days after the arrest, Anthony Thompson was found dead in his holding cell at the county detention facility. Cause of death, self-inflicted wound. Authorities reported he used a piece of metal broken from a heating vent. He left behind a notebook placed neatly under his cot. Inside were pages of handwritten statements, records, maps, and a final message. "I wasn't trying to start a war. I was trying to be heard." By the end of that week, 3 families were left grieving. Malik Thompson, age 17. Officer Landon Bryce, age 34. Anthony Thompson, age 45. 2 deaths, 1 imprisoned legacy, and a city left to debate where justice begins and where it ends. The Stockton Police Department faced renewed criticism. Internal Affairs reopened previous cases connected to Officer Neri but found no actionable violations. The governor called for increased mental health resources for grieving families involved in officer-involved shootings. No new legislation was passed. To some, Anthony Thompson was a criminal who took justice into his own hands and crossed every moral line. To others, he was a symbol of desperation, a man unheard, unhelped, and left to carry a loss too large for any courtroom. In the end, the official record listed both deaths as tragedies. But to those who lived through it, especially the families on both sides, tragedy wasn't a conclusion. It was an echo, still ringing. By the morning of May 7th, headlines had gone national. Father kills officer who shot unarmed teen, justice, grief, and the cost of silence in Stockton, a city torn after 2 deaths, 1 verdict. Cable networks devoted entire segments to the case. News anchors posed rhetorical questions. Analysts debated use of force policy. Podcasts dedicated to law enforcement accountability saw record downloads. Op-eds surfaced across the political spectrum. Anthony Thompson's story was retold and reframed again and again, as a tragedy, as a failure of the justice system, as a cautionary tale, and to some, as a rebellion. Networks replayed the timeline. They aired the footage. They pulled up Anthony's court appearance, his notebook excerpts, his final words. But one voice was missing from all of it: Malik's. Amid the debate, the boy at the center of the story began to fade from focus. He had become a headline instead of a person. Some outlets tried to bring the story back to him. A few highlighted his football highlights, his GPA, his college scholarship goals. But the momentum of the coverage had already shifted. It was now a national argument about justice, revenge, and whether the legal system had failed one man so completely that he felt the only answer left was bloodshed. Anthony Thompson died before any charges could be filed. His death eliminated the chance of a full trial, and with it, the opportunity for facts to be examined in a courtroom. The district attorney's office issued a short statement. "We are deeply saddened by the tragic loss of life on all sides. No criminal trial will be pursued." The department held a funeral for Officer Landon Bryce on May 10th. His family sat in the front pew, dressed in navy. His daughter read a short statement. "My dad was trying to do his job. I wish he hadn't pulled that trigger, but I wish more that he was still here." His widow declined to speak on camera. Outside, protesters stood quietly behind barricades. No chants. Just silence. Some held signs with photos of Malik. Others held signs with the words, "Two coffins, one broken system." There was no official city apology. No investigation into the original 911 caller. No review of policy. No formal disciplinary action against Officer Neri, who had since been transferred out of active patrol and into desk duty. He gave no public statement. Stockton returned to its routines. But not without questions. Online forums exploded with discussion. YouTube creators, podcasters, and investigative bloggers dissected every part of the story, from bodycam footage to autopsy documents, radio dispatch timestamps, and even the handwritten pages from Anthony's notebook that had leaked online. Some voices supported Anthony. Others called him dangerous. But nearly all of them agreed on one thing: Malik Thompson should not have died that day. One well-known crime analyst put it plainly in a viral episode: "If Malik had been given one more second to speak, we wouldn't be here. If the system had moved faster to acknowledge wrongdoing, maybe Anthony wouldn't have picked up a gun." This story isn't about two people. It's about what silence costs when a father buries his son with no justice in sight. Debates erupted over ethics. Was Anthony's action justified by emotion? Or was it a cold act of retaliation? Was his descent into obsession a failure of community support, legal recourse, or something deeper? A Reddit thread with over 40,000 comments summed it up with a chilling post. "It's hard to say whether Anthony broke the law, or whether the law broke Anthony." In the weeks that followed, Denise Thompson withdrew completely from public life. She moved out of Stockton with Ava and took a teaching position in Fresno. In a letter to supporters published by a civil rights group, she wrote, "I lost my son. I lost my husband. And I gained nothing. No conviction. No truth. No peace. The only thing that keeps me going is my daughter. She deserves a life not defined by death." Anthony's brother, Marcus, released a podcast episode sharing personal memories. In it, he spoke directly to his late brother. "You did what you felt you had to do. I don't agree with it, but I understand why it happened. You were a father who was told to wait, and wait, and wait, until you couldn't anymore." The Thompson family declined all future media requests. Their home was sold. The mural of Malik was defaced 2 months later. It was painted over the next day by local artists who added a quote from Anthony's journal: "Justice delayed is justice denied." As the story settled into history, the debate remained open. Was Anthony's act one of revenge, or one final desperate plea to force the world to look? Did he become what he hated, or was he made into it? Could the shooting of Officer Bryce ever be seen as separate from the death of Malik? Was this story about grief, or about a man forced to scream through violence when his voice was drowned out by red tape? A law professor at UC Berkeley said it best in a panel discussion: "The law does not allow what Anthony did. But we should be asking ourselves what kind of system creates the conditions where people stop believing the law will protect them at all." No charges. No trial. No full body cam release. No real closure. 3 lives lost. 2 of them buried. 1 stuck in memory. The city of Stockton put out a public statement in June stating that new training protocols were being considered for field interactions involving minors. No timeline was offered. No mention of the Thompson case was made. Malik's name was added to a local advocacy group's scholarship fund, launched to help students affected by police violence. The first recipient was a high school student whose brother had been arrested without cause 2 years earlier. She planned to become a civil rights attorney. This is where stories like these tend to fade, replaced by other headlines, other names, other cases. But for the families, the communities, and the kids still walking home in hoodies with phones in their hands, this story doesn't end. It lingers. Because what started with one boy walking home from school ended with 2 graves and a notebook full of questions no one ever answered. So we ask you, was this justice? Or was it grief with nowhere else to go? Let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in Anthony's place? Subscribe for more stories that the headlines forget and the justice system too often buries. Would you have done the same in Anthony's shoes? He waited. He pleaded. He buried his son without answers. When justice didn't come through the courts, he picked up something else. Was that a crime, or a cry the system refused to hear? Comment below. Was Anthony wrong, or just too broken to wait any longer? There are stories that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. This was one of them. A boy with his whole life ahead of him. A father left without answers. A city that never really healed. Injustice doesn't always come in a single moment. Sometimes it builds, in silence, in waiting, in the absence of truth. If this story made you think, if it moved you, if it made you ask questions no headline ever answered, you're not alone. We tell stories like this because too many are forgotten. So if you want more cases that dig deeper, stories that ask why, not just how, stay with us. Tap subscribe, hit the bell, and help us bring light to the stories most people scroll past. Your voice matters here. And the next case might be one you've never heard, but will never forget. Until then, stay curious, stay alert, stay human.